So we'll start off immediately with a colleague in Ukraine, Liz Throssell of the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights, who will introduce. Thank you.
Yes, good morning, everyone. We have this morning published our latest report on Ukraine. It covers key human rights developments from the 1st of June to the 31st of August 2024, during which civilian casualties and damage to civilian infrastructure increased significantly, with 589 civilians killed and 2,685 injured.
Sorry, if we can do that again, if we can cut the PA system in the room, that was a bit of an echo. If we can try that one more time. Okay, Liz, sorry, you can start from the beginning again.
Yeah,
sorry.
okay, sure. We have this morning published our latest report on Ukraine. It covers key human rights developments from the 1st of June to the 31st of August 2024, during which civilian casualties and damage to civilian infrastructure increased significantly, with 589 civilians killed and 2,685 injured. There was a 45% increase in casualties on the previous 3 months. The deadliest single day was the 8th of July, when a large-scale coordinated missile attack by the Russian Federation left at least 43 civilians dead. The majority of casualties occurred in territory controlled by Ukraine. A significant development was the Ukrainian Armed Forces cross-border incursion on the 6th of August into the Kursk region of the Russian Federation. While we have established some names of civilians who were killed and injured in connection with this incursion, we have not been able to establish the exact circumstances of these casualties due to a lack of access and limited available public information. In August, we requested that the Russian authorities facilitate our access for these purposes, but to date, this has not been granted. As of the 31st of August, the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine had verified that conflict-related violence had killed 11,743 civilians and injured 24,614 in Ukraine since the 24th of February 2022. During the reporting period, Russian armed forces continued to target energy infrastructure across Ukraine, affecting essential services and deepening concerns about the plight of the civilian population with winter approaching. These trends continued into September. The civilian casualty numbers for September are on track to be as high as in August. Intensive military efforts by Russian armed forces near the front line, Intensive military efforts by Russian armed forces have forced the Ukrainian government to evacuate thousands from near the front line. Attacks across cities across Ukraine, for example in Sumy, Kharkiv and Zaporizhzhia, have damaged and destroyed civilian property and infrastructure, including schools, hospitals and even a geriatric care home. And we have documented even more attacks against Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Regarding prisoners of war, the report, based on hundreds of interviews, details how Russian authorities have subjected Ukrainian prisoners of war to widespread and systematic torture and ill treatment. A range of factors indicate that supervisors in the detention facilities were aware of this treatment and had the ability to prevent it. Some public figures in the Russian Federation have explicitly encouraged inhumane treatment and even killing of Ukrainian prisoners of war. The report also assesses that the Russian prisoners of war were subjected to torture or ill treatment by Ukrainian forces during initial stages of captivity. The High Commissioner for Human Rights will formally present this report to the UN Human Rights Council on the 8th of October. I'll now hand over to Daniel Bell, the head of the Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, for more details about the report's findings on torture and attacks on energy infrastructure. Danielle, over to you.
Okay, can we unmute Danielle and also do something about the PA system in the room, please? Thank you. Danielle? Go ahead. Sorry, Danielle, it seems that we have a problem with the audio. We can't hear you here. Could we take a moment to try to correct this situation? Sorry, just if you can be patient with us, colleagues, just for a few seconds. Apologies, colleagues. We're trying to fix this. Okay.
Recording in progress. Recording in progress. Recording in progress. Recording in. Hello, can you hear me in the room?
Okay, we can hear you now, but there seems to be an echo still in the room. If we can correct that, that would be ideal. Thank you. Let's try one more time. Danielle, could you say something, please? Okay. I think I know that you have to leave
Please
soon,
just
Danielle.
give me a signal once it's been remedied.
Okay, now we hear you. Let's try now. Okay, go ahead, Danielle, please. Sorry about this. Let's try. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. And how is the sound now in the room?
Now it's fine. Now it's fine. Sorry
great.
again.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
No, thanks so much. Okay. I'll begin by addressing the torture and ill treatment of prisoners of war before turning to some details of our findings on attacks against energy infrastructure. First, since February 2022, my team has interviewed 377 Ukrainian POWs following their release from internment and 434 Russian prisoners of war interned inside Ukraine. The report released today focuses on findings from our interviews conducted over the past 18 months. A key finding of the report, as Liz mentioned, is that Russian authorities have subjected Ukrainian prisoners of war to widespread and systematic torture. We've interviewed 174 Ukrainian prisoners of war, and this includes 5 medics, since March of last year, and almost every single one provided credible and reliable and detailed accounts of torture and severe ill treatment. The POWs described severe beatings, electric shocks, sleep deprivation, dog bites, mock executions, sensory deprivation, threats, and degrading treatment. 68% have reported sexual violence. Torture or ill treatment occurs at all stages of captivity during the initial capture, administration procedures, and in the daily routines under appalling internment conditions. The abuses were documented across multiple facilities, both in the occupied territory and in the Russian Federation, showing consistent signs of mistreatment and patterns. Conditions of detention were typically poor, with most POWs reporting food shortages, lack of medical care, overcrowding, and poor hygienic conditions. We documented the death of 10 Ukrainian POWs due to torture, lack of medical care, and dire health conditions. This abuse was not isolated. Several key elements point to coordinated efforts across multiple state entities. For example, the routine nature of the abuse occurring on a daily or weekly basis and continuing throughout the period of internment, which sometimes it's getting up to 3 years, indicated knowledge of faculty supervisors. Russian public figures have openly called for the inhumane treatment and execution of Ukrainian POWs, often using dehumanizing language in public forums and also through state-owned media. Safeguards meant to prevent torture, such as regular medical care, family communication, oversight, and access by independent monitors, were frequently absent or ineffective. When external officials of the Russian Federation visited internment sites, in many instances, the torture and ill treatment temporarily ceased and conditions improved, indicating that those responsible for these facilities were aware of the mistreatment. These factors, combined with the adoption of broad amnesty laws for Russian service persons, have contributed to a climate of impunity. Turning to Russian POWs. Over half, or 104 of the 205 Russian POWs that we've interviewed since March have reported torture or ill treatment by Ukrainian authorities in almost all cases during the initial phases or the first few days of their internment. Methods included severe beatings, threats of violence, and in some cases, electric shocks. 10 Russian POWs have reported sexual violence. The abuse occurred almost entirely in unofficial or transit locations and typically ended upon arrival into the official internment facilities, where conditions generally meet international standards. My team continues to have unimpeded access to POW internment facilities inside Ukraine, and this has fostered an open and frank dialogue with the authorities and has led to improvements. Let me stress, accountability for abuses remains essential, and ending torture is a legal and moral imperative. Let me move to attacks against energy infrastructure. The report also covers the Russian Federation's attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure and the resulting harm to civilians. The analysis of the report is based on visits to 7 thermal hydroelectric power plant and thermal power plants and substations, 28 community visits, and 112 interviews with local authority, energy experts, tech experts, and residents of affected communities. Between March of this year and August 2024, the Russian Federation launched 9 waves of large-scale coordinated attacks targeting Ukraine's energy generation, primarily thermal, hydroelectric, and heating plants. Many of the facilities were struck repeatedly, some until they were completely destroyed. These attacks hit facilities in 20 regions, including Kyiv. Consequently, this year alone, 9 gigawatts of generation capacity has been destroyed. 73% of thermal power units were rendered inoperative, leading to an energy deficit and a reliance on imports. The cascading damage from these attacks has affected essential services like electricity, water, heating, sewage, public health, and education. Vulnerable populations, for example, older persons, persons with disabilities, lower income households, and children have been disproportionately affected. Last summer, many areas, including here in Kyiv, experienced power outages daily of more than 12 hours. Rolling blackouts are expected to resume this winter. But let me emphasize, significant efforts are underway to restore Ukraine's generation capacity and to mitigate the risks of a harsh winter. But this situation is exacerbated by ongoing attacks. Before we open up for questions, I would like to reiterate or return the civilian protection concerns that Liz raised. We documented a 45% increase in civilian casualties compared to the previous 3-month period during this attack. And as Liz said, this continued until September, noting, for example, the deadly attack on a hospital in Sumy on Saturday, which killed 10 and injured more than 20, is a sobering reminder of how civilians across Ukraine continue to be affected by this war. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Danielle, and of course, Liz, for those briefings. We have a question. We'll start in the room and then we'll go online. Christoph, AFP.
Hi, Christophe Vogt, Agence France Presse. Thanks for taking my question and for the briefing. I was just wondering if you could tell us, you said that the Ukrainian authorities were collaborating, that you have unimpeded access to the detention facilities. I was also wondering if you have any idea if there have been any indictments yet or even any trial sentences for the people responsible. And if I got you right, those abuses really happen in the first few days of people getting into detention before getting to the facilities where they will be held for a longer time, yes?
Thank you for the question, Christophe. Yes, we have unfettered access to internment centers in Ukraine. So this includes the 4 POW camps. We visited all of them and we visit regularly, as well as the CISOs, or the jails that sometimes temporarily accommodate Russian POWs. So for example, facilities in Dnipro, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, etc. So we have access. And we are able to carry out very open dialogue with Ukrainian authorities on where to make improvements. You asked about accountability. The Office of the Prosecutor has opened up 5 investigations into acts of torture, but these haven't proceeded beyond the initial investigative phases, and we hope that that will take place soon. I hope that answers the question. Over.
Thank you very much, Danielle. We have a question now. Is that satisfied? Okay. No further questions in the room? No? Okay, then we'll turn to Yuri of RIA Novosti. Yuri, over to you. Good morning.
Yes, good morning, Rolando. Good morning, Liz. Good morning, Daniel. I have, in fact, 3 questions because I have read the whole report, so for some precisions. For the first one, you have just said that more than the half of the 205 Russian prisoners of war interviewed by your office, more than the half report about torture and mistreatment, but you are not considering that despite this very high percentage, the torture and mistreatment of Russian prisoners of war in Ukraine is common. So I just wanted to understand why, what is the difference? Why are you not talking about systematic when this is more than the half? And even knowing that no one has been prosecuted for this act by the procurer, only 5 cases have been opened, but no one was suspected in that. Do you want to take question by question maybe, or do you want to take the...
I think question by question, because these are important questions and I don't want to skim over them, if that's okay.
Okay.
So Yuri, first, thank you for reading the report cover to cover and for the questions. Yes, more than half of Russian POWs have been tortured or ill treatment. It occurs, but the difference between the treatment of the Russian POWs and the Ukrainian POWs is different in scope and scale. So with the Russian POWs, it takes place at the initial capture in the early days, and it stops and they're safe once they're inside the internment facilities. Does that make it okay? Does that make it legal? Absolutely not. Why haven't we used the widespread and systematic language when it's happening to almost half? The scope and scale of torture in the Russian Federation and occupied territories of the Ukrainians is different. First, the geographic spread. My team has documented instances of detention in 60 unofficial sites and 76 official internment sites inside the Russian Federation. And of these 76 facilities, for example, in 57 of them, we document torture on a regular basis. Second, so it's geographic spread. Second, in terms of frequency and duration, it's not just happening once or twice when, they're first captured or an odd time or random. It's happening through the duration of their internment. So when we're interviewing the Ukrainian POWs, when they've come back, after 2.5 years, they're telling us about torture in multiple facilities throughout the internment, and it's happening on a daily or weekly basis. So, for example, I interviewed a returned POW about 10 days ago, and he said a day doesn't go by without somebody being beaten. Another factor that led to this assessment is the number of state entities involved. So it wasn't limited to just one group, because there are groups and certain shifts at certain facilities where it doesn't happen. But because it is happening across the places by different bodies, that also contributed. Another is the indicated knowledge of the torture and ill treatment by those running the facilities. For example, what POWs have been telling us consistently is in advance of an inspection or a visit by an external authority, the conditions change. So, for example, the torture and ill treatment stops for a period of time and the food rations increase. And then it goes back to the way it was before after the inspection. And so this indicates a knowledge or awareness of those running the facilities that the torture is indeed taking place. But again, coming back to your point, accountability is essential, and initiating investigations is not sufficient. Every act of torture must be thoroughly investigated, and every perpetrator needs to be held accountable. So sorry for the long answer, Yuri, but that was a really good question. And I look forward to your second question, please.
Thanks, Daniel.
Yes,
Go
and
ahead,
thank you
Yuri.
very much for the precision of the answer, really. My second question is about, you have a part in the report that is talking about the civil rights in Ukraine, and I was quite surprised because there is absolutely nothing about the issue of the forced and violent mobilization. Even if we can see every day dozens of videos across the country with people that being just catches in the streets, taken and thrown to buses, and this is really every day in Ukraine. And every day there is scandals with TCK, with the mobilization center, with some people that have been beaten there, that can't call to their family, can't call an advocate, and there is nothing in your report. I just wondering why.
Thank you for the question. And indeed, mobilization and conscription is a hot topic and a very important topic in Ukraine right now. My team, when we receive accounts of mistreatment and such conduct around conscription, we follow up these cases. And what we haven't seen is these cases amounting to the level of torture, etc. So it doesn't mean we're not following up on it, and we are aware of it. And if we do see an increase or if we see greater patterns, indeed it will be included. But this is something we are watching. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Daniel. Yuri, is that, did you have one last question? We do have quite a number of other hands up as well.
There is a last.
Okay, go ahead.
This is on the Kursk region. In your report, you are saying that you have, how to say, register some casualties, for some civilian casualties, but you can't say what are the circumstances. So in your report, there is no clearly saying who is the responsible of that. So it means that in your report, we can just see that there are casualties, but you couldn't find any proof or argument saying that the firing of the Russian army against the region, for example, are responsible for civilian casualties. But you are doing this, for example, in Ukraine. When Russia is bombing somewhere, you can say that Russia is responsible for that. Why it is not the case for the Kursk Oblast?
Good. So thank you, Yuri, for the question. So in the report, we document 12 civilian deaths and 12 civilian deaths and 201 civilian injured. And most of those casualties occurred during the early days, like in the first week after August 6th. In terms of attribution, like why aren't we naming one party or another? In the context of intensive fighting and in fighting on both sides, it is almost impossible for us to precisely determine attribution in the context of crossfire. Having said that, as Liz said at the beginning of her presentation, the OHCHR has requested access into these areas as well as to occupied territory. And having access to these areas would allow us to fully document the circumstances of individual attacks. So for example, With other attacks and the attacks where we have given attribution, it's because we have had, or it's contributed because we have had direct access to some of these areas. Thank you again for the really good question.
Thanks to you, Danielle. Okay, we have a few more hands up. So Lisa Schlein, Voice of America. Lisa.
Thanks, Rolando. Good morning, and good morning, Danielle. Yeah, very interesting and disturbing. I'd like to ask you about the Russian attacks against power grids. Do you see any, do you have any concerns about the possibility of any of the nuclear facilities being attacked either deliberately or by accident?
No, thank you for the question, Lisa. And as you pointed out, attacks against energy infrastructure is a huge concern in Ukraine right now. In terms of the attacks against nuclear facilities, this is something that we're monitoring. We can't predict what will be happening in the coming days, weeks, months, but obviously it's a concern, and we're hoping that the aerial defense systems will mitigate any incoming aerial attacks to these facilities. At the same time, we are worried about the upcoming winter, and it's impossible to predict what will happen this winter. For example, if the attacks continue, the blackouts may be intensified. The repairs to the destroyed and damaged thermal power plants and substations are underway, and we hope this continues. And there's a lot more. If I can also point out, Lisa, the Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine has also issued a bulletin specifically on this topic. It's on our website, and it gives some more details, or it adds on to the periodic report that was issued today. So I encourage you to go into that report, and there'll be some more details to more precisely answer your question.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Okay, Jamie Keaton, Associated Press.
Thank you, Ms. Bell, for coming to see us. It's really nice to have you. I just wanted to follow up on two issues. The first is, if you could just sort of put it in a nutshell, the differences between the types of torture that you're hearing, both of Ukrainian POWs and Russian POWs. Is it safe to say that the torture that exists of Russian POWs or Russian detainees in Ukraine is happening like very quickly at the or right at the beginning, whereas in Russia it is happening, of Ukrainian POWs, it's happening much more long term? I think if you could just summarize that in a single sentence. And then the second question I have is, I assume that I think you said 200 or 104 Russian POWs that you had interviewed, that was done in Ukrainian detention facilities. So I'm wondering, what access do you, or what access do the United Nations generally have to POWs in custody in Russia or in Russian-controlled territories? Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jamie. In a nutshell, the summary you provided is accurate. But what I need to emphasize is torture is always wrong. It doesn't matter if it happens once or 50 times, it's wrong every time. But yes, with the Ukrainian POWs, it happens across internment facilities, both in the Russian Federation and occupied territory, and it happens at the different facilities. So the guys that we interview have often been held in 3, 4, 7 facilities. So it's happening through the duration. And with the Russian POWs, almost every single instance that we've recorded in the past 18 months has been in the first few days of their capture, either in a temporary internment center or where they're initially interrogated. Once they're transferred to the camps or to the CISOs, they're safe. And so again, we have access to the Ukrainian POWs after they've been transferred, and we typically will interview them while they're receiving treatment in the hospital or other locations. So we usually interview them a couple of weeks after they've been back. Regarding the treatment and access, you asked about the Russian POWs. Yes, we interview them at the camps and in the jails. We have full access. And yes, half in the past 18 months, so 104 of the 205 have reported torture or ill treatment. You ask, do we have access to POWs in the Russian Federation? We do not. And as Liz had said, we've been, asking for access for a long time. So this is why we interview the Ukrainian POWs once they've been released.
Thank you very much, Danielle. We have one final question for you from Gabriela Sotomayor of El Proceso, Mexico. Gabby.
I can't hear Gabriela's question.
Nor can I. Let's try to, maybe she is unmuted. Gabby, could you unmute yourself, please? We'll have to.
I could also my email later on.
Yeah, Gabby, thank you, Danielle, for offering that way of communicating. Yeah, I think we'll have to move on then to the next subject, and maybe Gabby, if you can pose your question, maybe to Liz.
Hello?
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Gabby. We can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Sorry, but my question is for Liz Throssell in another subject.
Okay, if it's another subject, if we can ask for your indulgence, if you can wait, we have a lot of other briefers on other subjects, so if we can wait until the end, that would be great. So I just wanted to thank you again, Danielle. It's really great to have you join us here, and of course, you're welcome back anytime.